In this episode of Arts and Offers, we're going to be talking about the imperative importance of being number one in that top position in whatever your artistic pursuit may be. What we need to do is rethink about what we can become the leader in. Maybe general poetry already has that top spot. We're also going to explore the idea of competition and why competition actually may not even really exist. And that allows me to create a new space for myself that few other people can enter. You can do the same thing for yourself. And one of the central themes that you're going to find in this video is the idea of infinite specialization. Welcome back to Arts and Offers. This is the video podcast that is dedicated to that intersection between poetry, art, and business. Guiding you in this discussion today is me. My name is Jeff. It's Jeff with an O. I am a poet, and I am here to talk about why it is so important to be the leader in whatever it is you choose to be in. One of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes of Arts and Offers, and we've mentioned it, for instance, on some of the socials, is this idea of Zipf's law. It's a power law. What this basically states is that if you have, let's say, like the top 3 leaders in an industry, including in the art industry, you can think about poets in your city. What you generally expect is that whoever is in that leadership position is getting 3 times the amount of opportunities as the person who's in position number 2. Conversely, whoever is in position number 2 is getting like 3 times as many opportunities as whoever is in position number 3, and so on and so forth. So what does this mean for us in our pursuit artistically? Well, essentially this means that if you're not the leader, and especially if you're not in like the top 2 positions, it becomes very, very difficult for you to really make a name for yourself in your field, because there's a moat. The idea in business of a moat is that thing that you've developed that creates so much separation between you and the next person that it's very, very difficult for them to overcome. It could be, for instance, in technology, when Apple released the iPhone, the moat was huge because most other tech companies had never even, considered making the phone without buttons, and there's the iPhone coming out. So it takes years for people to catch up. So it's the same thing with our art. If you're in that top position, most likely what's going to happen is you're going to get more awards, you're going to get more opportunities to present your poetry, you're going to get more paid opportunities. You can expect to receive more income from your art and things like that. So obviously being in that top position is going to be really key for us. And that can be very discouraging because most likely if you look at the poetry scene or the art scene in your city, there's already people who are in those top positions. So what do we do about that? If those positions are already claimed, our life is really hard, right? Because what we see across different industries is position number 1 is already cemented. Okay, if you think really quick about toothpaste. What's the number 1 toothpaste you think about? You're good chance you're going to say things like maybe Colgate, maybe Crest. If we think about the soft drink soda industry, who are our top players? Coca-Cola, number 1. Number 2 actually has been dethroned recently. It's no longer Pepsi. I believe it's Dr. Pepper now. But the gap between Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper, or even the gap between Coca-Cola and Pepsi, is huge. And you can think about this for any sort of industry. In our city of Columbus, who's the top poet? Well, most likely I would probably say it's probably like Hanif Abdurraqib. He's probably in that number 1 spot. He's constantly touring. He's constantly getting invites. He won the MacArthur grant as well. So that top position's already filled. It's really hard for someone to take in that number 2 spot. And that's the advantage of being the leader in your category, is you get all the spoils that come with that. So the sooner we can arrive in that position, the greater opportunities that we're going to have coming to us naturally, just by the fact that we're the leader. So if this sort of power law keeps repeating itself across many different fields, including the arts and the poetry world, and that top spot is already cemented, what are we supposed to do about it? If you're an artist, you still want to succeed. Part of the verses is all about trying to get poets to achieve creative and financial independence. We're trying to live on poetry. So what do we need to do about that? Well, the good news is we need to be the world's best at something else. And fortunately for us, as Seth Godin writes, is that when we say, for instance, world's best is not an objective statement. It's a subjective one. And in fact, the world exists on micro scales. The world could be the best for what I can afford. Or the world could be the best in the area where I live. Things like that. So the world could be a very subjective statement. So we can start thinking about, how can I be, quote unquote, the world's best? How can I be the number one, in our case, poet for something? What we need to do is rethink about what we can become the leader in. Maybe general poetry already has that top spot. It's going to be hard to unseat them for that position. But the good news is we're not really trying to unseat anyone. We'll talk about this aspect of communication in a moment. We're not really interested in fighting and being, king of the hill. What we're interested in doing is finding our specific area that we can be the leader in. It's not about becoming a leader in a different area. It's about becoming a leader in an area that we pick and that we feel comfortable in. So, for instance, to give an example for how I apply poetry to my own work, so I'm a communications coach. I'm working with ESL. I'm teaching people how to sound more natural in English, but I'm also working with native speakers too to become just more effective communicators, whether they're talking on the street, whether they're giving presentations, whether they're leading meetings, whatever the situation may be. So one of the things that I actively do is a portion of our classes are regularly using poems as our base material. We're doing communication exercises off of poetry. So one of the things that's happening, in addition to some of the relatively innovative pronunciation strategies I'm doing that most teachers aren't covering, is we're using poetry as a device. So suddenly we can become the only communication coach that uses poetry as a device, that uses poetry as a tool. It's a field that's very specific, niche. It's something that a lot of places don't have, and a lot of other communications coaches aren't necessarily doing. So this is one way that we're creating our new market. It's not just poet. No, we're using poetry and communication. We're creating that tie. So this is why we need to create our own field where we can be the leader in. So you need to kind of ask yourself, and this is where being multi-hyphenated, I see that's a term being used a lot now, or having multiple passions, multiple interests can actually work to our advantage. I'm able to apply more of myself in this role. I can take my interest in language learning, in teaching, in pedagogy, in helping others in art and poetry, and unite them into one roof, right? And that allows me to create a new space for myself that few other people can enter. You can do the same thing for yourself. What are the specific interests that you have? What's a problem in that area of interest that other people have that you can create around and use poetry to solve? This is how we can start creating our own area. We can become the leader in a specific thing, and then people have to turn to us because there really isn't an alternative, or not an alternative that is as good at us as what we're doing. This also kind of gets to the concept of competition, why competition is in some ways not really the right word, because the reality is we're not really competing with many people because there's not many people in the area that we're targeting. There's slight differences between them. Other communication coaches, maybe they're using music. I'm not using music, right? Other communication coaches, they may be using even like fiction or essays. I'm not using fiction or essays. I'm using poetry. So, yeah, I mean, we're all in the communications sphere, but our approaches are so unique that we're not really competing with each other. I'm not in their area, they're not in my area specifically. And so this works to our advantage. The idea of using competition is not entirely true. We want people in adjacent spaces because that's a sign that we're in an area that has a real need that other people have. But for our specific skill set and what we do, there's really no one else that offers what we offer, right? That's also, just as a side note, that's one of the things I don't really like about corporate poetry, because a lot of times corporate poetry turns art poetry into competition. You know, you have to submit to contests where your poems are going up against other people's poems, even though it's a subjective field. And so you're basically just at the whims of how the judge is feeling on that day, right? Or what poems are being read at a specific moment and things like that. So not a lot of variables you control. It's creating a competition where in truth there really is no competition. My poems are not other people's poems. There's a uniqueness to it. And then that creates kind of value judgments and a whole other thing, right? So we want to be mindful of that. By instead approaching our art through this way, we remove that competitive element. I think it actually creates a healthier environment for poetry and for art in this way, because it embraces the fact that art is subjective. The way we use it is not actually used to make people less than or greater than. It's just you find what works for you and your need. The last thing I wanted to mention about all this aspects of specialization is the fact that because we're doing it this way, the reality is that the possibilities are infinite. You can combine any interest that you want together as long as you can identify a specific need that it helps other people with. Because of this freedom, it's very freeing. You're able to bring more of yourself into whatever it is that you decide to do. So this is the general idea that we need. Instead of looking at your situation and identifying, oh, these are the top people I'm going to try to create and get what they have, they've already gotten it. They're already ahead. It's going to take way too much effort and time to ever be in the same position that they're in, using the same methods that they use. That they already got there using the method that they needed. The good news is that you can arrive in a similar position to them by following a different route. Don't follow theirs. Follow your own based on your own specializations and your own uniqueness that other people don't have. If you're finding these ideas helpful and resonant, a couple books that I'm using to help guide myself through them are, right now I'm working through Marty Neumeier's Zag, which is a marketing book. And another book you may like too that's going to talk about finding ways to create some separation for yourself and your uniqueness is Daniel Priestley's Key Person of Influence. These are two books that I'm currently using that you may find helpful too. Thank you guys for watching this episode of Arts and Offers. We'll be back next week with another episode. I hope you guys have a good day, have a good night, and a good afternoon.